Oh, sorry. Come to this side a little bit more. I'm in the chair. Yes, yeah. It's a massive chair.
Hi, everyone. Just gonna wait a couple of minutes for people to trickle in, and then, head to a start on a hopefully exciting chat with Sachini and Prableen about sourcing young feminist organizing in the Global South. Right. In the interest of time, let's get going. There you go. Now I can see you all. Hi, Prableen. Hi, Sachini. Thanks for being here today. So this is the last event of the day for Young Feminist Europe's takeover of our NGO CSW booth to focus on young feminist resourcing. So all day we've been highlighting some important themes and issues, challenges, but also solutions regarding resourcing young feminist movements. And yeah, we're really excited for this last chat of the day, where you're going to tell us a bit more about the current challenges and solutions coming from the Global South for resourcing intersectional young feminist organizing. And yeah, so maybe just a few words about YFE, Young Feminist Europe. We're an open platform highlighting intersectional young feminist voices, amplifying these voices and these movements, and pushing for transformative young feminist leadership. So yeah, and that's also part of being able to highlight this work and create space for this work. And this activism is talking about resourcing our movements in sort of the broadest sense. Yeah, I think I'm gonna introduce our wonderful panelists and then pass it over to you. So Sachini, you're a queer feminist from Sri Lanka, and you're the executive coordinator at Research, which is a Global South-led and transnational feminist alliance of younger feminists, which aims to lead, create, and hold space for the realization of sexual and reproductive justice, but you also have many other themes you'd work on. And you're also a steering group member of the Alliance for Feminist Movements. And Prableen, you're a feminist activist from India, and you're the executive director of the YP Foundation, which is a youth-led organization that facilitates young people's feminist and rights-based leadership on health equity, gender justice, sexuality rights, and social justice. And yes, as I said, we're here today to sort of have a conversation about resourcing young feminist organizing from the Global South. And I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts and your experiences on this. I'm going to hand it over to you, maybe with this question. What is your resourcing vision for young feminist, intersectional young feminist organizing from the Global South? Maybe, Sachini, do you want to get us going, and then?
Vision. I mean, I think the more we do this work, the more I think about, and I think, you know, when I was a younger feminist, like I'm younger now, I'm not quite youth anymore. But I think there is clearly a need for more support and resourcing for younger feminist organizing or young feminist organizing. This we know, but I think as years go by, I keep thinking about also how do we unpack that a bit so that once we kind of, graduate from our young category, what kind of movements are we creating? Because I think that's also the place where we have to be like very mindful of, like, like if we are asking for more young feminists to be represented and supported, what kind of young feminists are we asking to be supported, right? And this is even more important because now there are all these like neoliberal articulations of feminism, and like there are many kinds of feminisms now, right? So then I think it's also like extra like useful to be able to, and also like, it's an act of solidarity to really think about this a bit more. So that, when we are looking at movements, let's say in another 5 years or 10 years or whatever time, that the movements will be like more intersectional and, will have more representation of groups who are excluded for various reasons right now. So I think, so with in research also, because we use this like a justice approach that really looks at the structural marginalizations or exclusions, and like, how intersectionality, like, like it's a buzzword, like you can say it all the time, but practicing it is a whole other business. So we are doing it in, various ways and learning as we go as well. But to really like try to understand, when we say young and what, right? So I think that has been a key, like, question for me. And to this end, like, we are also talking about like, and we know different people are doing this, right? Like, let's say the, Frida, the Young Feminist Fund, have been doing this work in certain ways. We see the Black Feminist Fund, who have been coming out with like some really like important research at the moment, right? Which is showing like stark gaps in how resourcing works. Because like from what we hear, if we look at the kind of commitments that get made around, generation equality and, in other spaces, there are these grand gestures being made, but when it like, like when it trickles down, it really like, trickles down, and then you don't really see it come into the spaces where it needs to. So I think in terms of a vision, that is what I'm saying, like, for us to really unpack when we say young, what does that mean? Like, what are the other intersections we want to see there? Then when we say global South again, global South is a catch-all now. And the global South is, like it's, I mean, we know why we use it for various reasons, but it hides a lot of inequalities. So when we talk about the global South, like if we talk about Sri Lanka, for an example, like where I come from, like we really need to be able to say, it's not just, upper middle class Sinhala Buddhist feminists who should be supported, right? Like, so then like, how do we kind of unpack some of that? And that can only be done like, by having these conversations. So, and then the last part of this, which is the resourcing. When we say resourcing, it is money, but it's also solidarity. It's about how we show up for each other. It's about the political support. So how do we unpack those as well? So I would like to talk about that a bit more later, but I'll hand it over to Prableen for now. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Sachini, I think, and thank you, Hannah, for this question. As you're speaking, actually, one of the things that's staying with me is that our constituencies are monolith, right? Whether it is young people, whether it is people from global South, whether it is like a regional representation, I don't think lives exist in that monolith, right? And for years and years, we've sort of spoken as feminists, we've spoken about intersectional identities, and we've also spoken of what does it mean for us to look into constituencies who are the most affected to be in spaces where decisions are being taken, right? And I think that, to me, in the resourcing is the value that is missing currently. That yes, it's not about because funding or resourcing of any manner is also about taking from one to give it to other, right? And I think that's where the real turf, quote unquote, really happens. But I think it's not really about, like you said, that there needs to be a solidarity that we need to create. But I think what is important as young feminists is, are there principles of solidarity that we can talk about, even from not just within the movement, but also from outside in the larger ecosystem? Because currently what we are facing is that, yes, there will be, say now, like you're saying in terms of buzzword, there will be, say, a young person in the room, or there will be youth representation in resourcing. But is there substantive participation, right? And when we're saying young, and absolutely agreeing, is that, are you getting a young person for for them to be young alone, or are you really looking and giving space for their intersectional marginalized identities? So, for example, in India, I can definitely talk about the fact that we are a youth-led organization. But if I am only, because young people and adolescents are not a monolith, I really need to make sure that the leadership that we're grounding needs to come from that intersectional marginalization, and also be intergenerational in one way or the other, right? I think the other thing that we've been sort of talking about in this whole era of substantive participation is, where does accountability really lie, right? So whether it is data getting collected on young people, of course, also and on our lives, but also on resourcing, like a lot of organizations and funding spaces have started asking, and rightly so, asking questions about the composition, for example, of your staff, right? And as the executive director, and also as somebody who's to respond to those questions, I'm always convoluted between, can I really ask these questions to my staff because I'm really pro self-determination, but at the same time, is this also about, like, affirmative action? And did we not fight for making sure that if there's a youth program, you have to have a youth focused sort of team, and you have to be, the people who are deciding this have to be from that constituency. So how do you really balance that? Is not something that I actually honestly have an answer for immediately, but that's definitely a struggle that I face when we talk about resourcing and when we talk about who's to be in the room. The other thing that I think that as young feminists that we face is and this is also because we're talking, we are here in CSW, right? I think in the last 2 weeks, one of the emotions that has come the closest to me is a said unsaid but very visible ask of young people justifying their presence here, right? So if you're a young feminist, and if you're a young feminist from Global South, the expectation for that justification is extremely high. It might not be said unsaid, but it might be said or unsaid, but it's definitely very visible, right? So, and it's also not visible just from like others, it's also for me, because I am actually putting in a lot of resources. There are a lot of people behind me who've not been able to. So I acknowledge that privilege that I'm here, right? But that privilege has also made me feel more conscious of the fact that, okay, am I really doing enough, right? And I feel to have that solidarity, and I'll close there because we sort of were speaking about solidarity. I think one of the things to have in solidarity spaces is to really say that, what does it take for us to come this far? What does it mean for us to grow the movement and ground it here, but also take it back to the grassroots, right? And that, I feel, is the chain that we really need to unpack and solidify as we move forward in our movements.
Thank you so much, Pravleen. And I think, a few things like really resonated with me. I think the piece about what are the principles of solidarity we are talking about here, but also the intergenerational aspect, and then this justification part, right? So I think to that end, if we talk about what kind of resourcing are we talking about, that's something important to talk about. And I'll share a couple of reflections and then, listen to you. So I think when we talk about political support for feminist movements, and Hannah earlier talked about the Alliance for Feminist Movements, and part of what we are trying to do is build not just financial support, but also political support. And we see this, financial support is political support, right? And political support is financial support. Correct. So these are not two things that are completely exclusionary from each other. But when we say political support, I feel as if, and this idea of justification, right? Because I think within our movements, and this has to start, I think, from within the movements where young feminists are and whatever constituencies or communities they may belong to. And I think the more marginalized you are, or the more excluded you are, the more you have to justify why you need to be here, right? And I think even in, let's say, participatory grant making processes, where I have been in let's say an advisory capacity, and without naming anything or any process, but I have noticed that there is a when there are, especially when it's more older feminists who are and older, by that I include myself as well, in that decision making kind of the position, there is always a thing about if it's from a young group, like, oh, like, this sounds good, but, will they be able to do it?
Yeah.
Right? And even if they've been around for 5 years or 10 years, if you're young and if you're led by young people, then there's always this thing. And we would never ask that from an organization that has been around, like for the same amount of time, but doesn't, say like, that they're led by young or younger feminists. So there is that. And then I think also, we are seeing a lot more imaginative ideas coming from younger feminist groups, right? And some like out of the box ideas. And then I think there is also hesitancy to support those because exactly for this justification piece, right? Because like maybe we are putting like collective care in the center, right? And saying when we are doing this work, we want to take care of ourselves. And I think there is like some hesitation around that, because then it's like, okay, like, is that a good use of resources, or like, like, are they, not being serious enough about this? Like, because like, especially like we talk about pleasure a lot and like how to center that in our activism. But when you put it in a proposal, like people are uncomfortable because it's like, okay, like, why do they want to have fun, right? Like, so there is that. So I think within movements, we need to see a lot more political support for younger feminist organizing coming up. And then when we say financial support, of course, we know, like, we mean direct support to groups, not support that trickles down through, like, let's say, INGOs or like, through the multilateral institutions, because we know it doesn't come with agency or like enough accountability. Like, we are held accountable, but they are not accountable to us, right? But at the same time, we know there are women's funds, feminist funds that have been set up as mechanisms to facilitate this. And I think like more and more like donors, but also like multilateral funds need to use these mechanisms more and more, so that direct funding comes. But also we want long-term funding. Like, you can't build movements or based on like, 1 year grants. Like even, I mean, 3 years goes by like so fast, right? Like, so like, those who are offering, let's say like 8 to 10 years of support, like that is actual support, right? Because then that helps us like as leaders to transition, to bring in new members. Like there are many things you can do with that kind of support. And then of course, flexibility and for it to be co-support so that we can actually pay people for the work they're doing. So these are all like characteristics, but I want to close by talking about that, close as in this part, by talking about the intergenerational thing, right? Because I think this is a really hard, conversation, because obviously like, and I think for research, because, we are feminists under 40 years of age, and we are in that like, the middle part also, where, we are going towards kind of also like building like more empathy towards what it must be like to be in these movements for a long time, and then, having to kind of, and it becomes like such a big part of your identity, all of that, right? At the same time, we understand what it's like to be young feminists and be at the receiving end of some of the kind of, discrimination or the exclusions that we face. But I think at the same time, when we are talking about resourcing, some of the ways to avoid replicating some of these like, cycles we are stuck in, like a lot of older feminists will tell you that they have no social protection, they have no pension. Like when they are getting older, there are no savings, like, because this work doesn't help you like build that kind of protection for yourself. So how do we collectively, like when we are asking for resourcing, talk about that, like not be afraid to say that actually like in another 50 years, or like, I mean, for me, it would be like 40, 30, 40, that, I don't want to occupy this space and like keep people out. But like, if I become desperate and if I don't have other options, then like it's possible, like, if I have children, if I have people I'm taking care of, like obviously I will need to occupy these spaces out of like almost like a practical thing. Not everyone does it for practical reasons, some people because they like power. But I think we have to balance this, right? So I think young feminists should be really talking about this, to say we need social protection, we need some of these like, like foundations, so that when we are leaving our institutions or when we are going into like, different phases of our lives, the support doesn't suddenly drop, right? So I'll stop there now.
We don't want to know your age at all.
I mean, I feel as if I've given it away.
I hear you, and as you're saying, I also hear the fact that because I mean, you've said most of it, like I literally was like, yeah, this is exactly what we're saying. Across the funding spaces, across resourcing spaces, also getting the same experience. And like, in fact, like the experience was because I became the executive director just a few months back. And I've had situations where, because I'm also a female leader, the fact that financing in my organization will become weaker is also something that's come very close, which is not something that has happened in the past, right? And it's not even a question. And I think some of the times this whole but the challenge really is that you just don't want to be performative with the kind of identities that you have, right? And I have always struggled in sort of balancing that performance and making sure that I am able to live my identity and use that as my power, but at the same time also acknowledge the fact that these are identities that don't necessarily exhibit power immediately, right? And that youth identity being one of those, because we've had situations where we've had to have, like, INGOs saying that we're ready to sort of support you, but I know that the donor would not give you the money directly, so let us host it, right? And we know the disparity that it gets created. I think the problem really is not the fact that there's solidarity and there's co-sharing of the resource. The problem really is that by the time it comes to me, I'm not able to build my organization, right? So I do the project, I do that cycle, and I'm able to sort of do the amazing work that I want to do. But am I really being able to build the kind of movement that I really want to do on the ground, right? And as young people, and definitely we're all talking about it, because pay parity, gender gap in pay parity has really conversations and questions that young people are actively asking, right? Within organizations like YP, but also within like other spaces that young people occupy. So definitely there's a question there that is in our mind of what happens, because we've all chosen a sector which necessarily does not come with those kind of social protections, right? At the same time, we also want to make sure that this is lucrative and sexy enough for people to get into this space, right? But to me, the larger question is not to say that, okay, like I said earlier, that it's not a pie which I'm taking from somebody. And what I'm really saying is that, can we all get in the same kitchen and co-create and co-own the process, right? And not because patriarchy definitely divided us. Funders are dividing us even further, right? And whoever is the funder in this space, we will still ask you for resources. We will still send you proposals. Still love us, but I really feel like it's like this division that has happened is a systematic division that, as collective feminist movements, we really need to challenge. Not because I'm taking your space, because I'm a youth organization, or not because you have taken my space already, but to acknowledge the fact that you've taken that journey up until that point. I need to take that journey, right? And how do I really make sure that I am in that process, right? So what hurts me, for example, is that in CSW, I see the same people and the same people coming again and again, right? I do acknowledge the fact that it's not that it will require, like, this is my first CSW. I was shocked. I was like, what's happening? Where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to do? And you also have the fear of like missing out on things, right? So definitely there's experience that is required. And I don't discount that experience at all. But I'm saying that what would it take that experience to then get passed on? And then can I co-own this process with you to be able to then pass it on further, right? So that next time onwards, even if I'm coming with at least one more person who's able to take that baton ahead, right? And I think that we have not done consciously within the movement, that we are not ready to, for whatever reasons, and valid, non-valid, but is there value in us for us to really say that, can we really structurally look at what does it mean for us to create and co-create and co-own these processes, and be able to say that, okay, we will actually, it's not just experience that is coming with age, it's also an experience that's coming with my lived realities, right?
Exactly.
And those lived realities need to be centered, right? So if I am, and because, like, as youth organizations, there are times, for example, I do not know there are systems that I don't know of when we sort of seek funding, right? Because there's no book that you are, but can I really have somebody who's done this process and call up and say that, can you help me in putting that proposal together, right? Can you tell me how this, and can you tell me what does it mean to have a contingent fund? I did not know about this up until like my last proposal, right? And also at the same time, there are the same resources. You do get rejected, and therefore you feel like, okay, there's something that you're not doing the best. So I think there is somewhere some spaces that need to be created for us as organizations, as organization leaders, to be able to build our own capacities and to be able to acknowledge the fact that the capacities need to be built. But while we're building that capacity, build it from a point that, okay, we're building the movement and the institution and not just really there for
that particular funding or something.
And not making it so tokenistic. I think there's lots that we can do out of solidarity. And I say, like, for example, like as much as I hate capitalism, but like this whole capitalistic sort of culture that they have of like with Coke, with having Coke, Thumbs Up, Pepsi all together as parent company. But they have their own branding, right? They have their own markets, but at the same time, their way of functioning has to be somewhere to centralized, right? But there's nobody eating on each other. They've sort of figured their pathways. I'm saying I don't even want parallel pathways. I want a big highway of feminist movement coming together. But in that big highway, some of us will be the zebra crossing, some of us will be on that right side and on the left side. Some of us will be slow. Some of us will be driving at like 800 per hour. But we all will exist because we've occupied that space, right? And how does that occupation look like for us in that space? Will have to be intersectional. It will have to be intergenerational, but it will have to be co-owned and co-created. Otherwise, I think somewhere we will again come back to this conversation a couple of years and then again thinking of what did we do?
Thank you, both of you. Time flies, time flew. Thanks for these really incredible insights. And I really loved how broadly you defined resourcing in this chat, which I think is really important to get the message across that when we're talking about resources, we're not just talking about hard cash, but about a bunch of things, and that it all is dependent on each other and linked together. I wanted to maybe just add one thing, because probably you just talked about it so eloquently, about the importance for young feminists to occupy space and also learn from each other and try and step out, as difficult as it is, from this competitive mindset that comes with resourcing and funding. And today with Young Feminist Europe, we're actually launching a specific space for young feminists on the Young Feminist Hub, which is an online platform run by young feminists to co-learn, share, peer learn, strategize together around funding. And the whole point of the space is to break down the taboos around resources, but also to try and push back against the dynamics which put us in competition with each other, and instead think about it from really a movement perspective. So you can, anybody, and I encourage everybody to join the Young Feminist Hub and stay tuned for all of the updates there, because we're hoping it's going to be a really exciting space. Just to close, maybe Sachini, I know that you're also involved in the Alliance for Feminist Movements, which is another exciting co-learning space. Do you want to say, I know you have to leave, 2 words about it? And
No, it's fine. I mean, this has been a really good conversation and a lot to think about. But so I mean, like, I like the analogy of the highway, right? Like, of all the, hustle and bustle and everything happening. So if we look at that, then like the Alliance for Feminist Movements is, I mean, I won't go into a lot of details, but I think Hannah can share like a link to the Alliance so that people can know more about it. But it's a multi-stakeholder initiative that brings together governments, private philanthropy, women's and feminist funds, and feminist civil society. And the idea, and I think we are like, the more we are talking about it, the more we are crystallizing what we are trying to do there. But it's mainly like we said, we know what kind of funding and like political support and financial support we want for feminist movements, right? And of course, there is more to be unpacked in each of those, but broadly, we know these are the kinds of like support we need. But operationalizing that is another story, right? And I think what we are trying to understand is because if we look at governments, they work in a certain way, right? If we look at private philanthropy, we know these are some of these are patriarchal institutions, some might some are more progressive, and there are progressive individuals within these institutions who are trying to shift money and power. And then if we look at feminist funds, they do a great deal in the movements, but at the same time will face specific challenges in how they get to move money as well. So how do we kind of bring all of these people into a table to talk about this, but not in an advocacy sense, not for me to come and say, now you give me money, but to say, here is the kind of support I need. What in the ways you work are the roadblocks to that, right? And what are the ways we can try to remove them? How do we as feminist civil society influence that? But also who are the other actors we need in order to influence that? And how do we maintain our role as civil society in holding these actors accountable, while also figuring out each other's language, right? Someone said this in a steering group meeting recently, and it really resonated with me, that we speak different languages. In the governments, we'll talk about things in a certain way, right? So how do we kind of learn what those languages are, and how to communicate with each other, and how do we do it in spaces that we create where none of us have to feel as if now every word out of my mouth is a commitment, right? It doesn't have to be a commitment. It can be a problem solving space where we are trying to kind of have the conversation, say my fears about this are these. So that's what the Alliance is trying to do. So to this end, I think we are we have about 300 something feminist civil society, I want to say, but I might be wrong on this, so I don't want to go on the record. But we have a large number of feminist civil society, and what we are right now doing is a mapping to find out who is leading this organization, what are they working on, who are their constituencies, so that we get a better idea of which regions they're from. And then I think young feminists have to be a cross-cutting theme, right? Like we said, if we are putting only into that young feminist basket, then it becomes very easy to either include or exclude us. But if we are if we are there across, then that's a very different way of engaging. And then you're making sure that you're making that these our issues are heard in the different kind of discussions that happen. So we would encourage people to join the Alliance, or if you have joined, to look up the emails you're getting, because there are some invitations to engage. So there are some learning labs that will be coming up, where it's the idea is that these stakeholders come together to have some of these conversations. So one is about unpacking the context that we work in, because I think a lot of the time governments, or even private philanthropy, they don't understand fully the context we work in, right? There is a surface level idea, but how do we really unpack this to say, no, when we say there is authoritarianism in my country, this is how it manifests, right? And it's not the same as it happens in in another country. So one learning lab will be around that. Another one will be unpacking what do we mean by impact, because the way we define impact is different in these different stakeholder groups. So how do we kind of and that's fine, the reality is that we will each define it in different ways, but how do we find out how to speak that language with each other, so that we are able to shift resources. So there are a few of these learning labs coming up, and I think write to the email address also in the Alliance, so that info@allianceforfeministmovements.org, so that you can find out more from the coordinators and get involved. Okay, that's my pitch.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you to both for your time. Have a great end to your day. Have a great end to CSW. Travel safe, and see you soon.
Thank you so much,
Hannah, for hosting, and thank you, IFE.
Thank you. Bye. Bye, everyone.